Hello, I'm Jane Dutton. It's just gone past 6 o'clock, and there's just 3 hours to go before voting in South Africa's national and provincial elections stops. But from what we are hearing, there are still queues at so many stations. So if people have got the stomach for it, they could be queuing until the early hours of this morning. I'm at a place called The Rock, the Results Operations Centre at the Gallagher Estate in Johannesburg. And this is the next stage of the elections. I find it the really exciting stage. This screen next to me, I hope you can see it. Oh, just slightly off screen, you will see the votes which will eventually start coming in. There's the national ballot paper, and I know it'll look familiar to you because you went out today and you voted. And I'm just wondering what your experience has been. That anarchy, the eruption of violence hasn't happened, though we're hearing a lot of reports of glitches and party agents that didn't behave the way they should have, and that's certainly what I found at Uber Park in Johannesburg a little bit earlier on. Our reporters were out and about across the country speaking to many of you, casting your vote, and this is what we found.
Doctors are not working, teachers are not working, young people who are qualified are not working. They give us 350, they gave us 20 rand extra. We are not working. That's where the problem is. But Ramaphosa with his parafara, he's got money on his farm. He's not helping anyone. He was supposed to give to the poor that money. So we cannot. We have to change now, you understand?
My first voting was in 1994. So because of people sitting on top there, they don't actually look at us on the ground. So now I want to change. Maybe things will come right these 30 years. I don't rely on politics. The politics are liars. They keep on promise you a lot of things, and after they sit on top on the top, they forget about us.
30 years into democracy, we're thankful for South Africa for being a democracy, but we're getting to a time now that we have to make the decision to look at another ruling party in order to fix all the corruption, to fix all that's bad in South Africa, the load shedding, etc. There's too many etceteras to talk about. But the significance of this election is just to maybe put new people in charge and get the country right.
Yeah, this is my first time voting. It's very important for us to start voting because we're obviously the next generation, and it's very important because as much as we may not think about it too much, but one voice can really change a lot and really do a lot. So yeah, we're the next generation going forward, so we should really get established in this whole process so that we should be able to make a change going forward.
Ek stem dat die kinders moet werke kry en ons soek huise en water. Langste wat ek gelos het, die ligte, die load shedding stukkie, dat al die goeders en die paaie, dat kan reggemaak word.
Voted for the DA for the first time, my first vote. I'm actually happy about my vote because it counts and it makes me very happy. So yeah, that's how I feel about my vote.
And what do you want for the next 5 years in this country to happen?
To see a change. To see a change, really.
Ngivotela NC.
Afike nini ekuseni?
Ngifike nga 3:30.
3:30?
Yeah, ngajikela emuva mangabuya manje ngabo 6:30.
I'm quite nervous just because a vote does matter. But I think after speaking to my sister and a few people, I think I know who I'm voting for. And yeah, just a bit scared.
Ek dink die korrupsie in die land, om dit te verander en om te kyk na 'n beter toekoms met die goed wat nou aangaan, hoe alles agteruit gaan en niks wat eintlik verander het oor die laaste paar jaar met die party wat aan bewind is in die land nie.
What am I voting for? I'm voting for a better life for everybody in the country.
The importance of voting is change. Change more than anything. Renali 30 years and Namanje, there's no socialism.
I voted because we need change in our country. South Africa is in deep trouble. So maybe my vote will make a huge difference. It'll make a huge difference for the youth. It'll make a huge difference for myself. I voted because I'm trying to secure my future, trying to secure a future for the future generation of South Africa.
Namusi ndo da uvota ngauri ndikonyoga uri ndivuse unga muvhuso wenda ukhetha. Ati konyoga uri matshelo ndisumbe muvhuso ndiri awukoita zwone ndisongo khetha hokhetha vhaṅwe vhathu vho nkhethela. So ndikonyoga uri muvhuso ndo mbusa ndivo ndo uvotela. Ndi konyoga uva na mafhungo kha muvhuso uri arali ḽiṅwe ḓuvha zwi tshi nga itea uri khari ḓe yambe ri na problem ndi kone u vhudza uri vho ro ni khetha a ri ngo ni khethela uri ni ite hezwi ri khou ni khethela uri ni ri vhuse zwavhuḓi.
This is the time is now. It has just arrived. We're going back to power again. No one is going to remove us.
How do you feel about standing in this queue? It's a very historic moment for the country.
Or nearly 28 million South Africans who've registered to vote. And this was the screen that I was trying to point out to you a little bit earlier on, the prop that failed. I'm happy to say it's back. So this is where the numbers will start coming in. I mean, it's, possibly later tonight, definitely by tomorrow morning. And you'll see all the parties there. And, that's the competition. We'll have to leave that, right? Sabu and Galwa, edited Large Prime Media, and Sanusha Naidu, political analyst. Good to have you with us. Some of the people we were looking at there, you could see they were first-time voters, right? I spoke to a first-time voter. I mean, she was literally shaking. She was so excited. I mean, this is an exciting and important election.
Absolutely, Jane. And I think, what's important for this election is that it takes us back to 94 because we're seeing the queues, we're seeing some of the glitches, and we'll have to wait and see when the IEC releases its satisfaction survey, how people responded to the technical, operational side of this election. But I think for young voters and also for voters that have been voting in every election, it's a bittersweet election. It's one of those elections where you're going back to 94. If you remember 94 and you're remembering what it was like for you to vote in that first election. So I think you got to remember that this election is not just about whether we have 52 parties on a ballot paper or whether the ballot paper looks like a booklet or 3 ballot sheets that you have to vote on. It's really about the electorate coming out, and this is about voter turnout.
Yeah. And you were saying a little bit earlier, and I'm just wondering what you're thinking about voter turnout, how important it is this time. You said it's going to be completely different. What are your thoughts? The traditional analysis doesn't apply.
Without having a crystal ball, but having just anecdotally, I actually think we're going to have a high turnout. And I think,
why is that?
Gauging by just the level of excitement that I've seen out there. I mean, I haven't seen an election this closely contested. And I must say that even in my own family, the number of first-time voters that are excited to be coming out to vote today. I come from a family where, depending on what the mood is, you'll have probably half members of the family voting and others not. I can tell you today that every member of my family, immediate family, is voting, including my son.
And why?
And it's actually precisely, I think, it's an understanding of the importance of this election, but also the awareness, I must say, that I think because you've got so many political parties participating in this election, there seems to be a lot more awareness. And I also do believe that the social media also does play a role in terms of popularizing political parties, but also putting politics at the center stage of the political or the discourse in society. But I think the other point here is that there are besides the fact that you've got these many political parties, I think everyone has gone out, every political party has gone out to make sure that they get as much participation as possible. And I think there is a sense of an understanding that this election is actually about South Africa and not about politicians or political parties. Although I must say, though, that I think while Sanusha may compare to 1994 in terms of importance, 100%, but I think voter education was less affected this time around than it was in 94. I mean, yesterday I was watching the press conference and one of the journalists actually reminded us that we used to have TV programs like TV dramas like Kululega. There used to be adverts, there used to be stage plays that educate people. Until today, you still had the IEC issuing graphics of how to vote and what to do, and there was a lot of confusion about how one can or cannot vote at their local station or for the national vote. I mean, I'm one of those people. Were I not in the media, I wouldn't have known that I have to apply for the Section 24, which allows me to vote nationally. I have a lot of people who automatically assume that they would be allowed to, but they were not able to do that.
Let's go over to Tsidi, my dear. She's on the floor. She's got guests.
I'm coming to you live from the the National Results Operations Center here in Midrand. Behind me, as you can see, is the leaderboard. I keep saying there are no votes counted as yet. Why? Because South Africans are still queuing up, trying to cast their votes, trying to make their mark, their X, in what they want to see for this country. But for me, this particular venue is the nerve center. This is where our democracy finds its expression, and we pave the way towards what we want to be and where and how we want to meet our destiny. There are politicians here, there are journalists here, there'll be multiple media briefings as well, but we want to bring the politicians in and see what they think and what they make of where we are at the moment. Joining me is the first Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Nomvula Mokonyane. You've been on the ground campaigning really hard. The results of whether or not communities have heard you will find their way on that board eventually. What are your thoughts and your sentiments so many hours into voting day?
Thank you very much for inviting us. We remain hopeful because we've been with the people of South Africa for a period of over 112 years. And we have served together with them over the last 30 years of democracy. And together we also reviewed what has been done over the 30 years of democracy. We went back on the review of the ANC's manifesto of 2019 and 2019 to 2024. And out of that, we developed this magnificent elections manifesto that we have as the ANC with the 6 priorities, but also something that demonstrates that South Africans still want to continue working together with the African National Congress to accelerate change. And the cues that we see, the stability that has now been confirmed by both the security cluster as well as the IEC, we remain hopeful that nobody will be turned back at 9 o'clock, and that when the results come out here, it will be an expression of the will of the people of South Africa, that the ANC must continue to work together with them in making South Africa a better place.
I'll speak about that confidence a little bit later. Let's speak about the challenges today. I saw the EFF earlier on, and they're worried about the queues. People are worried about the long lines and how long it's taking for people to make their mark.
I think what has been done now by both the IEC as well as our party agents, all the parties that are participating in the elections, is to reflect on what the reasons, case by case, per VD, that lead to the long queues. You know, it is a trading day today. There are VDs that we know that workers have just returned back home and they are joining the queues. We also know that there are VDs where you have surnames of the alphabet M and N that are longer in the voters' roll. We have also said they must go to the presiding officer to make a presentation that let the voters' roll be dissected, so that you then have multiple queues that go also with those surnames that have got the alphabet M and N. In many instances that are longer, and where there's a situation where you can reinforce with the capacity that was in the VDs where there's a low registration. The IEC has also been encouraged to move people, their infrastructure to the nearby voting district. Of course, we also are quite concerned about the fact that it's getting dark pretty early. We've raised that both in terms of the security plan and the work of the IEC. We've been reassured, and we're getting feedback from our teams now as to whether indeed there is a capacity to deal with those logistical issues that were flagged with the IEC. But for now, we remain also humbled by that revelation of longer queues. Remember, there was low voter turnout previously, and I think our work is yielding these results of the long queues.
All right, that's Nomvula Mokonyani. I did say I wanted to speak to you about confidence, but I'm going to leave that to the leaderboard to talk to you about how the ANC has performed. The ANC seems to believe that it can renew its mandate with the people, but there are many parties saying, actually, no, ANC, you can't. I'm joined now by one of those parties, a new player on the scene who's captured the media attention to a large degree, really. And not just because they're a new party, but because of its connection to former President Jacob Zuma, a former ANC president, now on the opposing side, saying he does not want to see the ANC receive a 50+1 majority. I'm joined now on the floor by Ntlamulo Zela.
Yes.
No, I always got confused. I know who you are, Ntlamulo. Ntlamulo is the spokesperson of the Umkhonto weSizwe party. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. It's your first time contesting. Your sentiment on how this process works and how the day fares.
Well, look, I must say, today has been a bittersweet day. Bittersweet in the sense that we've been waiting for this day. I think most South Africans who've always wanted to see change, who wanted to actually cast their vote, have been looking forward to today. That is now happening. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of glitches. Leading up to today, there's a number of issues that have been raised, that have been quite concerning. But we're getting over that now, and we just expect that there'll be transparency in this process. I've been around most of these voting stations.
Yes, what have you been seeing?
And what I've been seeing, quite honestly, is a great voter turnout, especially youth. I've seen a lot of young people, which is really, really encouraging. I mean, I ended up also at Home Affairs this afternoon to just go and see what's going on there. And there alone, I mean, the turnout at the Home Affairs on a day like today, people going out of their numbers, that is just...
In essence, Ntlamulo, you have fresh eyes, right?
Yeah.
Seeing it from the political perspective for the first time.
Yeah.
What does that say to you about the youth numbers, but also the queues? People are saying snaking queues. People are saying this does feel 94-esque. I always say there is no such thing. This is not our 1994 moment. However, a lot of people are speaking about how impressive it looks, yet there are concerns about how slow it actually is once inside, how slow it's been trying to turn people around and getting people to vote. The capacity question is one that some have raised.
Look, I mean, naturally it will go back to the issue of, the glitches in the system and so on and so forth. Some of the other voter stations have opened an hour and a half late and so on and so forth. I mean, you guys know about that. But I think when you refer to the voter turnout, and especially the youth, remember 4.4 million additional registered voters, 77% of those are youth. So that should be telling. And I interacted with some of the youth, for instance, today. And they were saying most of them it's the first time that they've ever actually going to be voting. And I asked them, have you witnessed any other elections? Yes, they've witnessed 2 or 3 other elections. So there's something about these particular elections. And we said, this is a spiritual process for us and for South Africans. So,
You think you're going to disrupt still, not beyond the campaign? No, you see the disruption of MK on that board?
This is about us winning, not disrupting.
No comment. Wait, quickly.
Yes.
Former President Jacob Zuma did go out to vote sometime in the afternoon. He didn't really engage much with people. I think he greeted some, but I would have expected him to speak to people. Why was that decision taken for him not to maybe even share his thoughts about what the moment means?
No, President Zuma is going through a bereavement right now. His brother passed on yesterday morning. I had a conversation with President Zuma about that. So, he's just going through that process. So, naturally, being a traditionalist, he ought to keep to himself and not necessarily engage the media. So that's all. There's nothing else.
And before I let you go, I see voter vessels from Freedom Front Plus. Before I let you go, the question of threats constantly being linked to the MK party. You speak, for me, sometimes in forked tongues. One message, you sound like you adhere to the constitution that you want to challenge, but you play along whatever the framework is. And then you hear some members associated with your party making threats of civil unrest. And that's led to some jitters. So that conversation, that confusion has not left the MK party. Your sense of how we are understanding your organization?
What the amazing thing about it is the following. We just lost 2 of our members murdered 2 days ago. You never seen
And Eyewitness News covered it, don't lie.
No, I'm just saying.
We were present in Katlo.
But I didn't hear you ask me the question about it. And also, you don't even...
You can share your sentiments?
Well, I'm sharing my sentiments exactly. I'm saying that also. There's another 10 members of ours that have been murdered in KZN. And also in Mpumalanga. No one refers to that. So MK party is a peaceful party, but for some reason people want to taint us with this brush that we are a violent party and so on and so forth. Look at what happened in Pongolo. We opened up a case in this regard, right, where our gazebo
was ripped. Which is the right thing to do.
So and our gazebo was ripped. We've never acted violently. The members at which you referred to that made those kind of comments publicly, we dealt with them. the IEC took us to court with regards to that. We were represented yesterday in court. We're quite comfortable, and based on their submissions, that there was no case, quite honestly, and the IEC is quite honestly clutching at straws. But yeah, we know what has been the conduct between ourselves, with the IEC between ourselves and them. So yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Nhlamulo Ndlela, speaking there from the MK Party. We are coming to you from the floor here at the National Results Operations Center. As I keep saying, the nerve center, really, of South Africa's democracy. This is where we find true expression to the concept, the idea, the will of the people. We'll see those numbers in the next couple of days to see what South Africans want. Joining me at the moment is Freedom Front Plus's head of elections still, Voter Vessels. Voter, thank you for your time. In 2019, you were part of the success stories. We are now in a new year, heck of a lot more parties contesting for space. Your thoughts about how you will fare?
It's very early to say, and a lot has happened today. A lot of technical issues, a lot of people that were disenfranchised because they could only vote on one ballot paper. They were actually supposed to vote on all three, and those things will play a role. But we are very optimistic if we look at our turnout and if we look at our support and predictions. It looks as if we are definitely going to continue the growth that we saw in 2019, and it's going to be significant.
My suspicion is, well, before I even say my suspicion, I've watched a lot of court cases in the lead up to these elections, quite close even to the actual elections date. My suspicion is that we might actually find these elections in a court of law. What is your sense? You speak now about people who've been disenfranchised. What are your expectations of the way forward? Do you think that we'll have dignified losers?
You see, in all elections in 2019, we also had problems, also discrepancies between the ballots, and all kinds of problems. But the test in law with regards to election results, and if it's free and fair, is always, would those mistakes and problems have a significant impact? Will it change the outcome? And the definition of that, or the test, is will it have an impact on who the governing party is? Now, in this election, we are on a knife's edge. So 1,000 votes can make that difference. And that is why I think you're correct. I think we might have court cases about a lot of these things that have been happening today. And it's actually very unfortunate that the IEC repeated the mistakes they made in 2021 with the VMD machines, with unskilled and not efficiently trained IEC officials and presiding officers, and that's really unfortunate.
Last one from me, and a quick one really. There was a meeting, I understand, with the IEC and the Party Liaison Committee not too long ago ahead of the media briefing. What came out of it? Are you satisfied with responses to some of the issues raised by the parties?
Well, a lot of the things they can't explain. You know, one of the significant things that's happened today is that a lot of people were correctly registered when they checked. And all of a sudden, they changed. They registered in places they've never lived, never been, never registered at. They are completely disenfranchised. Then the whole ballot issue, they can't explain why the VMD machines say that. And they only sent out a message to provinces at 2 o'clock this afternoon. That was too late. A lot of these issues were already raised on Monday and Tuesday between or during special voting, and yet it continued today. So there's really a problem with IEC staff at polling stations.
All right, thank you so much. That is Freedom Front Plus's Voter Vessels. My sentiments about elections are always about the officials who work for the IEC and how well they understand their job. The sentiments really across the board as far as politicians are concerned is that IEC doesn't have staff that fully understands what it was meant to do. Lots of frustrations, but also very long queues of South Africans patiently, in some cases frustrated, but waiting to cast their ballots, make their mark, and determine the direction this country needs to go into. Back to you in studio.
Tsidi, my dear, in the thick of it, where all the action is taking place, Anusha Naidu is with me, and Sabu and Galwa, and we were talking about Nomvula. I mean, she was not her normal chip herself, right? What's going on there? Is that indicative of how the ANC is feeling?
It's a tough election for the ANC. I mean, imagine you have to think about where you're going to be after this election? Are you going to have a majority? Are you going to be able to have the seats in parliament? Will you be able to convene the kind of cabinet you want? I mean, it's tough for the ANC, but I think tougher in a sense that they're probably also thinking about what happens from now till 2026. And these are some of the dynamics of this election, because it's really about not crystal ball gazing, but understanding the nuances that with this election, you kind of also have to think about parliament. We've been focused a lot on the national, on whether we're going to see a coalition at the national, how big that national coalition is going to be. Will we see a massive drop in the ANC to 40%? Will we see the coalition being a kind of collective group of political parties that are like-minded, not like-minded? But I think Parliament for me is the big question, because after this, you've got a series of events that need to happen as per the Constitution. So once the election is proclaimed, the results are finalized and announced by the IEC, I think from the date of the election's announcement or just before, and Subu can correct me on this, you've got to basically start convening your parliament. You've got to start thinking about the inauguration. You've got to start thinking about who's going to make your cabinet. I mean, these are all big things, because the biggest thing that you're going to think about is once you convene that parliament, they've got to now nominate a president. So we're not voting for a president right now. We're voting for a political party who will get the number of seats in parliament. And whether or not we're going to see, I think the last time we saw that was when you had two candidates being nominated from the floor. And then once that happened, you go into secret ballot.
Yeah. I mean, the feeling is that regardless how badly the ANC does, Cyril Ramaphosa is going to remain the leader. Sabu's looking at me not so convinced.
I don't think it's that straightforward. I mean, having observed previous ANC conferences, the issue of succession, actually, discussion on succession starts on the day that a winner is announced at a particular conference. And there are already murmurs within the ANC of what happens beyond Cyril Ramaphosa. So I think this election is actually crucial for him, because how the ANC fares will also determine how much longer he remains in the position.
Yeah.
Because if the ANC does well, then obviously there'll be the natural discussion of succession, because 2027 is coming and his 10-year term will be done. But if the ANC fares badly, as Sanusha says, 2026 becomes an issue, and that, I believe, will become the issue that is used when the ANC as a National General Council next year to say, let's now fix things towards 2026. And remember that in this very province, if you look at the average of the ANC in 2021, in the 2021 general elections, it was scary. They actually got 35% of the votes. So if you then, of course, we don't compare national, provincial, and local government elections, but there's normally a 5-6% variance in those numbers. And if you use that yardstick, then it actually indicates that the ANC will pretty much lose its majority in this province, because it won it actually by a whisker, 50.7%. In 2019, and if you follow the trajectory of the ANC since 2009, it has been on a decline, and that decline has been around 5-6%. So we can expect that in this very province, and hence you saw there's this spirited campaign by the ANC where it pulled out its, for lack of a better word, its big dogs out to campaign because of what is at threat. So I don't think that it's that straightforward for President Ramaphosa. And I guess perhaps it also explains why there's this a constant consternation around his address to the nation on Sunday as to was it necessary, was it campaigning? I guess the Electoral Court will tell us.
Exactly. So it's not over yet, is it? Before we even get to that point, there are many factors that we've got to look out for, right? Obviously, now we're still guessing. But we're going to look out for voter turnout, right? The fairness of it all, these glitches, the party agents that allegedly got involved, or not even allegedly, we were told that they got involved in Uber Park, for example.
Yeah.
What is it that we should be focusing on now before we get to that?
Okay, so there's two things that's going to happen from now until the voting stations have basically closed the door after the last voter has voted. So that could be anything in terms of who comes into the queue at 5 to 9 or 1 minute to 9, and you can't turn them away because the law says you have to close the voting station closes at 9 o'clock. So whoever's in that queue that came in before 9 o'clock will have to be given that opportunity and right to cast their vote. So that's the first thing.
Yep.
The second thing would be is once they've done that, then of course they go into counting mode. And so that has to be secured, and then they'll start counting. Once they've done the counting, bar any glitches, bar any contestations, the party agents will then have to agree, and there's a slip they all sign, and then they'll have to post it onto the door of the voting station. That then gets communicated or transmitted back to the IEC, and then they go through their verification and auditing processes. So that's a process. Depending how big the voting station is, and let me give you an example. Robben Island will be probably the first one that will come in because it's a small voting station, right? So they will probably just come in, and there'll be no kind of dispute or party agents claiming maybe the seals came in and ate the votes or something. We don't know. But the point about it is that those are smaller voting stations will have an easier way to basically go through the process and then put that notice on the voting station door and then get this back to the IEC. When you start seeing the bigger stations coming in, the bigger areas, and remember this time around, you've got that IEC legislation, that amendment around the domicile. We spoke about Section 24A and how May 17th was the cutoff. But also remember that they were getting people to vote closer to where they are domiciled. So that is also a kind of way in which the IEC has tried to kind of create a much more clean out of its voter roll, if you want to call it that. And that was Parliament asking the IEC to speed that up. Now that's going to be important as well, because that will impact on whether or not people were able to vote and go to a voting station and vote nationally if you haven't applied for that Section 24A form, or if you actually applied for it but you couldn't vote on your regional ballot or on your provincial ballot. So these are some of the technicalities. And that will then determine how you actually see the votes. Because once all of this is done, assuming they deal with all disputes and we are able to have this election go towards an announcement maybe on Saturday or Sunday, the latest, or something on the 3rd of June, that means that we have to look at total valid votes that are counted, not the spoiled votes. So you can have a voter turnout of about 17.5 million. And please, this is not me telling you 17.5 million people are coming out. I'm giving you a theoretical figure. 17.5 million people could have voted in this election, of which you have to count the number of valid votes. And on that, you work out how this allocation of seats and votes will carry out. We have to worry about the spoiled ballots in this election, because you have 1, 2, 3 ballots. You can have, you just know, you don't know in that spoiled ballot pool which is a spoiled national ballot, which is a spoiled regional ballot, and which is a spoiled provincial ballot. We could end up in a situation, just from thinking about this from a scenario perspective, a regional ballot that's spoiled will affect a political party's seats in parliament, and it can affect an independent candidate.
And spoiled ballots, I mean, there were many in the last elections, right? You were saying hundreds of thousands.
Millions.
Millions.
I think the issue of spoiled ballots is actually one that's heartbreaking, because actually I think the calculation from the last election was that had those ballots been cast for a particular party, it probably would have been one of the top parties in the top 5 or top 6. So it's quite an interesting thing. So two things could be at play here in terms of the turnout. I'm anticipating higher turnout, and I could be wrong because of the very glitches that have been reported, because there are still people who are standing out in queues. In the dark. But I think also the positive thing to take out of that is that they are still standing in those queues. They are determined to vote. So there is something about this election that makes it special, beyond the fact that it's 30 years. Because if it had been any other election, if somebody had just turned out on a particular morning just to vote, and then they've been there for 3 hours, they would give up. So I think that's what makes this election important. And I think it's also quite important for democracy. And I think we must also say, by the glitches, that this actually has been a fairly peaceful election.
And I want to talk more about that, but first let's listen to what some of the politicians had to say today. We covered many of them voting in different parts of the country.
How do you feel about standing in this queue? It's a very historic moment for the country.
I'm a little shell-shocked because it's not easy to vote for oneself. But I think this election is very important to everyone in the country. It's important to those who want to make the country better, and it's important for those who are on the run from all the criminality in looting the state and so on. So our duty today is to go out. I want to encourage everyone to go out, vote for a party that is not corrupt, vote for a party that is accountable, vote for a party that is non-racial, doesn't encourage hate against immigrants. So let's get out there and do our job and vote.
But there are two things going for us. The one is that we have shown our ability to act against the corrupt within the ANC. It took us a long time, but we are there now. Jacob Zuma is out. A corrupt faction within the ANC is now a corrupt party against the ANC. So that's what's with us. So what we lose in KZN, we gain in trust in the rest of the country, even in the Western Cape. And secondly, the principled stand that the ANC took on Palestine, I think has signaled to people that we have found our moral center again.
We've run a good campaign as the African National Congress, and it is my hope that we will achieve an outright majority. I think this is very important for stability in our country and for continued progress on the program of transformation that the ANC initiated from 1994.
Yes, we are celebrating 30 years of our democracy. This will be my 7th time that I will be voting. And I think as South Africans, we are blessed that we are living in a stable democracy, freedom of the press, freedom of the media. People today have to make this choice, what is best for them. And that's the beauty of what we fought for, for all South Africans to enjoy this democracy.
So I'll be voting for one of my coalition partners. I can tell you definitely who I'm not voting for. I'm not voting for good, that's what. And I'm not voting for the DA. My reason for that is you've seen the behavior of good in council.
Happy with the young voter turnout so far, but we need to call up more young people to come out and vote because honestly, this country and this land, we are right now in the governing position, but it's on behalf of those young people. They must take this country and move it forward.
I voted today because I feel we must have change to the better. And it is important that we stand up and vote. The only people that can change the country are the citizens of this country.
One of the major challenges that we are currently sitting with, which I think we need to tackle with all our energies and all our resources, is the high levels of unemployment in this country, and particularly youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is a very difficult challenge to abate, but I firmly believe if we are better focused, both national, provincial and local municipalities, and rope in the private sector, we might be able to address it and reduce it drastically.
Well, the challenges are really diverse. I think the big thing, obviously, depending on where you're situated within this voting district, is service delivery. I think Oliver knows Bosch, housing, water availability, safety in particular are really, really important, and just community and other physical infrastructure are really important.
How do you feel about standing in this queue? It's a very historic moment for the country.
His comments about KZN and if they lose it. What?
And I tell you why. Remember, Cyril's whole presidency has been about the reform of the ANC. But the biggest frustration, even with ANC members and the very same Thabo Mbeki who's now out campaigning for Cyril Ramaphosa in the ANC, has been that those reforms, they've paid lip service to them. So, two things have happened. One, Jacob Zuma is a curse, and at the same time, I would say what was the opposite of a curse?
Blessing.
A blessing for the ANC. Because Jacob Zuma, it's easy now to cast Jacob Zuma as the representation or the personification of state capture and corruption, and to see MK as the embodiment of exactly that. So if you are the ANC and you are losing votes, what better spin than to tell the voters that, or if you are losing, if you lose the type of Jacob Zuma, to say, this is the ANC cleansing itself.
Yes.
Organically, all the baddies are gone.
Yes.
Now
See, we
we
told
are
you.
rebuilding this ANC. So that is the narrative. So I'm not surprised that he's saying that, because they are, if he's mouthing that off, he's suggesting that the ANC is aware of the threat of Jacob Zuma, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. Because remember, in 2009, the ANC lost votes in all the provinces, save for KwaZulu-Natal. And why was that? It was the Jacob Zuma factor. In fact, I remember the late Mangosuthu Buthelezi is saying that, well, we lost some votes because of the Zulu-ness of Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
And that actually is a factor in these elections. I mean, Sanusha was sharing a video of X, or Twitter, as we used to call it, of snaking queues in Umlazi, right? And again, you can argue that it may be because of the glitches, but no. These are people who are determined to vote. And the last time we saw such snaking queues, and I think that kind of a video is that popular, is because it gives that sense of nostalgia of that world-famous picture, which became the embodiment of 1994 of a snaking queue. So that then tells you how much interest there is in this election, and also, particularly KwaZulu-Natal, how interesting it will be the outcome in this election. I think Jacob Zuma will be a huge factor, but he won't only hurt the ANC. I think he will hurt the IFP and the EFF as well.
So we hear that Zuma, when he went to vote in Nkandla, looking quite demure, very quiet. Apparently, his head was down, went in, went out. Everyone was waiting. Is there going to be an explosion of violence linked to him? It hasn't happened. Doesn't mean it's gone away. What do you think's going on?
No, I don't think you can take that as a bet that it's gone away.
No.
I think it's all part of the theatrics of how you utilize the space,
Is
you
it the
utilize
lull?
the
Is it the-
optics.
yes.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that Jacob Zuma has been doing really well is utilizing those platforms, whether it's the court cases that the MK have been successful in, or whether or not it is the Constitutional Court ruling that the Electoral Court's decision to basically allow former President Zuma to be a candidate and even to be an MP. They overturned that ruling. I mean, I watched him in a BBC interview about a few days ago, and that BBC interview was very telling,
very
but also
telling.
chilling, because he is, in his mind, he's right.
Yeah,
The
he's a
constitutional
freedom
justice
fighter
are
and he's
wrong,
gonna fight.
and
Yeah.
that he actually knows the law better than them, and nobody has actually proved anything against him in terms of evidence to suggest that he is the guy that's responsible for corruption. And so when you listen to the narrative that they are projecting, it's a narrative that can actually tilt in a very dangerous way towards the other side.
Yeah.
The MK party has also been making statements that implicitly imply that if they don't get what they feel should be rightfully and legitimately theirs, they are basically have put the IEC on notice. And so the IEC also suffers in this election. And we talked a lot about the political parties and the contestation, and we talked about people coming out and voter turnout. But I think one of the big litmus tests for the IEC in this election is its credibility and integrity. So that is why the satisfaction survey that's carried out every election by the Human Sciences Research Council is going to be critical in terms of how people felt about this election. Was it free and fair? Was it credible? Yes, there are glitches. Yes, there will be problems with the zip machines. Yes, there's one IEC official that's basically overseeing the entire voters' roll in a station. People are frustrated. They're in queues. But if they come out in this survey, which will probably be released tomorrow afternoon or maybe early Friday morning, once the IAC signs off on it, and I think it'll be good to get the person who ran the survey to talk about the election satisfaction survey.
Yeah.
If it comes out in the higher 80+%, that means that the IAC also won in this election because their credibility has been put against a rope. From the time that it started this process in terms of the Electoral Amendment Act, so many factors that have basically said that the IAC is disingenuous.
Sabu?
I think actually the other point, just to add to what Sanusha is saying, is that to be fair to the IEC, actually they've had very little time to turn around. remember that until the new nation ruling, they were planning for an election in a particular way until the Constitutional Court says, yes, the Electoral Act as it stands is unfair insofar as it disenfranchises independent candidates from contesting. And Parliament was given 24 months to remedy, and actually Parliament took its time. And I think it got to a point where they thought they could ask for an extension. Now, which means that the IEC must wait it out, but in terms of the deadlines, the law is clear that you have to call an elections within 90 days after the expiry of a term, which means that whatever would have happened between end of May and the end of August 2024, we would have to have an election. So given those time constraints, and the changes in the law and the issue of the ballots and the compromise that we ended up with in terms of the 3 ballots and the 200 seats that are the regional seats. And also actually until a few days before the election, there were still cases in court. Which still had to be decided. So this was actually a tough election for the IEC, and I do hope that they will be vindicated once again as a credible institution that has been able to carry out free and fair elections in this country since 1994. Because also, in fact, the IEC is not just highly regarded in South Africa; they've actually highly regarded in other parts of the world where they have assisted with elections. So one does hope that it actually is able to be vindicated, because as you would know, and some of this rhetoric that Sanusha is referring to could be a deliberate attempt to actually undermine the IEC and actually cast aspersions on the outcome of this election. So it may be peaceful now. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but we cross our fingers and we pray that political leaders will be responsible and understand that this country does not need violence or bloodshed.
Zaki Ahmad was saying that he was quite taken back by the experience of voting for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's emotional when you see yourself on a ballot paper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, being the activist that he is and being the kind of civil society voice, especially around the HIV/AIDS and the antiretrovirals, and how he spearheaded that whole thing against the Thabo Mbeki presidency, I think makes him feel that it's an emotional space. I think if anybody would be emotional, will feel that way, because we know how vibrant civil society has been in this country and continues to remain so,
That's right.
even if we still have our
thanks
doubts.
to people like that.
And thanks to people like Zaki and the fact that he's morphed the Treat with Action campaign into different spaces. Equal education, ground up is one of his fomenting ideas of how you want to look at media, looking at all the other stuff, the learning institutions, the educational institutions. So yeah, I think it would be emotional. I guess any one of us sitting there having that kind of experience. But I guess also emotional for him from where he's come from. And it's very important. And I think it will be interesting to compare his response to how the other independent candidates felt when they cast their votes
I'm sure
today.
other people felt they were entitled to be on that ballot.
I mean, the advent of that and the independence, and I mean the dynamic playing field that we have now. People say it's fragmented, but it's also quite exciting, isn't it?
It is quite exciting. I actually think that we will have one of the most exciting and robust parliaments that we've had since 1994. If you look at some of not just the independents, I mean, it would be nice to have someone like Zaki Ahmad in parliament, but there's also Annelem Da, who was a firebrand of COPE, who rose to prominence as a youth leader of COPE. If she makes it to parliament, she was one person I remember who actually could call out President Jacob Zuma at that time around the issue of his treatment of Kwezi, around the rape case, boldly so, right? And then you have these number of opposition parties that are actually quite vociferous and sitting on polar ends of the political spectrum. So I think we're in for
Keeps
an
it healthy.
exciting and a very intriguing 5 years, Jane.
And from an age point of view, I mean, a lot of complaints about our politicians being geriatrics. We obviously need to embrace the youth and embrace the youth in our politics. Do you think that was addressed? Was that well covered
I think what they did was they telegraphed a lot of messages of how important the youth vote is.
Yeah.
18 to 24 and then 18 to 34 and so forth. I don't think they really spoke to that cohort of the electorate. I think what they tried to do was they tried to say, well, we understand that you're important. And that's why I think the UJ study, which asked that question about those youth that are between the ages of 18 to 24, will you still vote for the ANC? And they said, no, we'll vote for an opposition. And the question was, but you are a recipient of the COVID temporary relief grant. And they said, it doesn't matter, because they are telegraphing their own message to the political parties to say, we don't have loyalty to one single political party. We look at our parents and we realize that loyalty has been undermined, so we don't want to be like them. So even if you give us a grant, doesn't mean we're going to be loyal to you. And I think that's a very important thing to look at in that study that was done. But the other thing I wanted to say was that the youth, I think, are also realizing, and I think it's a wake-up call in this election for those geriatric political parties that have to start thinking about how the youth are going to become the real game changers. I think you have about, I don't know how many candidates in this election standing, I think 18 years and a little older. So you got that coming into this election as well, which is important. Last point, I think we must not underestimate the electorate, because they can split their vote and can force political parties to work in parliament, almost like a de facto coalition in parliament as opposed to national.
Yeah. You mentioned something a little bit earlier on about political parties not really engaging
Developments,
with us this time.
No. I felt they were telegraphing their messages more towards trying to undermine their opponents as opposed to speaking to the people. So they were speaking past the people. And I think that is something that we have to think about really, really importantly, because I think that they too missed they missed the memo on this election. Because what they were doing was they were thinking that if we telegraph the polls, we will talk about what we're going to do. So they did the same thing. What the ANC did was they said, well, if we come into power, we'll double the social grant. We'll do this, we'll do that. Well, you know what? If you come into power, you can't change economic policy making.
No. Sabu, Sanusha, let's listen into the IEC. Their press briefing is starting now, and they will hopefully give us numbers and address any of the factors that we've been witnessing today.
Booths, if we may please lower our voices so that we're able to know where we are. We're definitely on a heavy countdown. CEO, let's brief.
Good afternoon. Oh, good evening. South Africa is in the last 2 hours of voting in the 2024 national and provincial elections. And although we are nearing the end of the voting period, many South African voters are still casting their ballots in certain parts of the country. We are experiencing a late surge and are processing a large number of voters in certain areas, in particular the metropolitan areas in Gauteng, the Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Eastern Cape. In today's earlier briefing, the Commission indicated that it would implement measures to increase the processing of voters in busy areas. We are pleased that our efforts are beginning to yield results, with the length of the queues beginning to reduce. The Commission is also pleased to report that most glitches reported earlier in the day have now been overcome, allowing electoral officials to service voters timeously. Part of the measures that we implemented to deal with the long queues in the metropolitan areas was to call on the counting officers who were due to join later, but we called them earlier to assist with dealing with the queues. The Commission wishes to reiterate that all voters who arrive at the station before 9 will be allowed to vote. even if it takes beyond the closing time to complete the process. So no voter who's at the station will be denied their right to vote. The staff of the Commission will remain at voting stations to ensure that every voter is given their ballot. This provision ensures that every citizen who has made an effort to be at the station is allowed to vote. We urge those who have not voted to use the remaining 2 hours to go and make their mark. Members of the South African Police Service will remain deployed at voting stations as well as through normal patrols to ensure the safety of the voters. The Commission is pleased with the high turnout at many voting stations across the country and wishes to thank voters who have exercised patience in the queues while waiting for an opportunity to vote. Is the police patrols to ensure the safety of voters. Voting has been completed at all correctional facilities across the country. We remain grateful to the Department of Correctional Services for its ongoing assistance in ensuring that inmates exercise their democratic rights. Once the counting processes have been concluded, the Commission will start a process to remove all voting materials, which is ballot boxes, as well as other bulk material back to the storage facilities. Of course, the process will be handled with utmost care. However, should members of the public spot electoral material that has been used, they are urged not to touch, but to report the matter to the Commission and/or the police. The Department of Home Affairs will remain open until 2100 to assist voters who still want to collect their identity documents. As I indicated, in order to improve the quality of the counting and the completion of the result slips, the Commission has instituted a new category of electoral staff who will support the presiding officer with the counting effort. The recruitment criteria for this staff was slightly different from the rest of the staff, as high levels of numeracy were mandatory. 3 such staff are being appointed for each voting station and each substation where we operate a voting center. And as I indicated, this staff has been called to voting station earlier than anticipated in order to augment the capacity where we are experiencing long queues. The Commission now wishes to share with the public the counting process that will unfold as soon as voting station closes. First and foremost, ballots are counted at the voting station where they are cast. So there is no transportation of cast ballots from one point to the other. Party agents and independent candidates, agents and observers will monitor the entire counting process as well as the results compilation. Sealed ballot boxes will be opened and emptied in front of everybody at the voting station. And each ballot is then unfolded face down and checked for the Electoral Commission's security stamp. Stamped ballots are considered to be valid because you want to protect against a situation where ballots were brought from the exterior without validation by the officials of the Commission. All valid ballot papers are grouped according to their colors, representing the different tiers of the election. The ballots will then be sorted into piles according to votes for each party or candidate. And then they'll be packed into bundles of 100 until a count is confirmed in respect of a party or a candidate. Then result slips are completed by the presiding officer and party agents, as well as party agents for, obviously, party agents representing political parties and agents representing independents will be expected to countersign the result slip to confirm the correctness of the count attributed to their party or to their candidate. The other electoral stakeholders, such as observers, are also allowed to observe the counting process. According to the Electoral Act, the Commission has 7 days within which to announce the results. In the past, we've been able to declare and announce the results well within this period. And even on this occasion, we'll endeavor to achieve the same. We wish to thank the key role players in this election, political parties, independent representatives in the Political Liaison Committee, as well as the ESCOM for keeping the lights on. Wish to thank the media for really taking out the message out there to members of the public. So we continuously engage in the unfolding electoral process and to deal with issues that may still arise from the operations at the 23,000 voting station. The Commission wishes to thank voters who have already responded to the call to vote and appeals to all those remaining to make their way to voting stations before 2100. And for those who are in the queues, we assure them that their turn will come and we will not close the stations before they cast their vote, and thus we call for their patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simon Mabolo, Chief Electoral Officer of the Electoral Commission. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I've got also the online platform monitored by Peladi. We'll also take questions from there. I'm going to go this way. This first block, second, third. 2 hours to go, ne? So we're not camping here. I'm going to start with you, Busi, this side, and then we go that way.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Busi Chimambe from the SABC. I wanted to find out how prevalent were the difficulties experienced with the voter management devices at the different voting stations. What was the impact of some of those difficulties, and how do you intend to mitigate them?
It's Natasha Puri here again from SABC News. I know the IEC has clarified the issue of, overriding the 2 transactions. But there's a case here. Somebody just sent something saying that they were approved for Section 24A vote at another voting or province. But when that person went to that voting station, they were told that they should actually go vote in Johannesburg. So can I just have clarity on that? Have there been any problems in regards to the Section 24A vote? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I also just want to ask if the IEC is aware of cases related to Section 24A, farm workers who have not been able to vote because of lack of possibilities to move in between voting stations for reasons that I already stated. We heard about cases in Zanin and grandmothers also in some places that could not migrate to a voting station because of Section 24 misunderstandings and some of the officials not even knowing about Section 24. So there's a lot of issues around Section 24. Just to ask the IEC once more if there's any remedy that is possible for precarious voters of that nature.
Please introduce yourself and the media house. It makes it easier for the panel. Thank you. We come to this block, please. Those who've got microphones, please follow me.
Got the microphone.
I'm avoiding a situation whereby we're all raising hands. Others are going to struggle.
I already have the microphone, yes, Estate.
Where are you?
Right in front of you.
Okay. All right, let's proceed.
Sibusisonga Loa from EWN. CEO, I'm sure by now you've done some kind of a preliminary investigation as to why the digital machines or the scanners failed in the manner in which they did. Are you able to tell us what your understanding is that would have caused this? And secondly, we've seen a lot of snaking queues, and that suggests to some people that it could be as a result of a higher voter turnout. But then the cynical view is that it's because of the delays and the technical glitches you have experienced. I know you can't give a definite answer, but are you able to give us an indication in terms of what you are anticipating, given the fact that we're now 2 hours away from closing the stations, in terms of voter turnout, what you anticipate? Thanks.
Okay. May I please request that we, no, don't move that mic, please. Thank you. I want us to start from the front, go that way, so that we just do it rapidly. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Kate. Rebecca Davis, Daily Maverick. Some voters reported their ballots were placed in 3 separate boxes, and others that they went in, all ballots went into 1 box. Does this matter? Secondly, there were reports of some voters' rolls not being in alphabetical order, which seems to have significantly delayed things. Are they supposed to be in alphabetical order? And lastly, at a voting station in Kraaifontein, voters have just been told by the IEC officials that it's not enough to be in the queue at 9 p.m. They have to be on the voting property in order to be eligible to vote from 9 p.m. Can you just clarify that? Thank you.
I'm Itumele Mafisa from The Citizen. Firstly, I would like to find out where do we expect, which provinces do we expect to be first in terms of results coming in? When will that be? What time? And perhaps if I could ask, Julius Malema has accused the IEC of deliberate delays and assumptions that elections could take 2 days. Will elections be completed today, or could they go into a second day? Thank you.
No, thank you. Limkuno from Umkhonto Wesizwe Party. No, earlier on.
Excuse me, please. May I only request journalists, this is a media briefing. All the political parties have got a formal meeting with the Chief Electoral Officer, which is part of the program. May I please request anyone who is not a journalist, please do not ask questions, because this is the fora only for journalists. May I respectfully please request that nobody who is not a journalist does not ask a question. I humbly request. Thank you.
Veronica Mahwadi from Newsroom Africa. I just want to know if the IEC is aware in Thokoza that voters were turned away. They were told that they cannot be able to vote at all. This is at the Thokoza fire station, that voting station. And just a quick one, if the IEC believes that it planned adequately for the high voter turnout, obviously as some people have been in those queues for 7 to 8 hours. Thank you.
In the queues for how many hours? You said a number there? All right. Okay. May I please end with you, Ne? Then I'm going to take the second batch so that the team can be able to answer properly. Thank you very much.
My name is Norman Masungwini from City Press. The question maybe is related to my colleague. One of the voting stations in Strobens Valley, we hear that people were turned away even though they were registered there because they were told that the ballot box were full, so they can go to next voting station. How is the IEC planning to resolve that? And maybe second question is relating to the Home Affairs closing hours at 9 while the voting station is also closing at 9. Maybe the distance, and then how is that going to assist those who are collecting their IDs around 9 and be able to make it on time to the voting station? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. May I pause it on that note? Please pause it for me. Let me get the CEO to answer the first batch of questions.
The question about Home Affairs closing at 9, the Commission is unable to speak on behalf of Home Affairs. The issue of how prevalent is the VMD difficulties, it's uneven from municipality to municipality. There's no consistent performance across even a municipality. I think let's not forget that when you use the internet, there are many variables at play that affects the performance of your connectivity. It could be factors related to the infrastructure. It could be factors related to the software. It could also be factors related to bandwidth and traffic. So there's a whole range of possibilities that may affect the performance of technology such as the VMD. What is the mitigation? Look, the VMD it's an important part of the voting process, but it is not it's not a legal requirement. So the legal requirement at the voting station remains the voter's roll, and all voting stations were provided with a voter's roll. So as soon as we experienced those difficulties, we advised presiding officers to revert to the use of the voter's roll, which is a legal requirement competent for voting. Section 24A must also be understood in the context of the following background. When we had the 2 registration weekends, one in November and the other in February, indications in that campaign were clear that you vote where you are registered. And the message was, go check your registration details because you will be expected to vote where you are registered. Now, the Commission at this stage is unable to gainsay lawful provisions. The Commission just does not have the capacity to gainsay a legally instituted provision for people to vote in the voting districts in which they are registered. Evidently, we are in for a higher turnout than we had in 2019, which is why it is the single most intention of the Commission at this point to ensure that every vote that is on the queue, every voter rather, who's on the queue is given an opportunity to record their political choice. And we are committed to that. We've made adjustments to the process. We've placed additional resources to ensure that everyone does get an opportunity to cast their vote until whenever it takes. The three separate boxes, the inconsistency, yes, we've seen that. It has no bearing. All those ballots are competent and will be counted. No, there are no deliberate delays on the part of the Commission. It is not so. We want to assist everybody who's in the queue and take their ballot. We have no plan for a second day of voting. We've never entertained such a plan. So voting will happen until it concludes and until everybody who's on the queue is given an opportunity to vote. The ballot, people being turned away because the ballot boxes are full, it shouldn't be like that. It's something we can follow up. We have sufficient supplies of ballot boxes. We have sufficient supplies of ballot papers, and no one should be turned purely on the basis that the ballot boxes are full. So if you provide the details of the relevant station, then we can follow up. I think I've addressed all the questions. What about the results? Well, we did indicate in the statement that counting will happen at the station where the ballots were cast. It will happen in front of observers and party agents, and a result slip will be generated and countersigned by party agents as well as observers that may be there. From then on, it will be taken to the local office of the IEC in a tamper evident bag. And at the local office of the IEC, where the local party structures will be present, it will first be scanned into the results system to create an image of that result. After creating an image, which will then be available for political parties that are here on those screens once that image is created, because it will be linked via a barcode to a particular voting station. After that, then it will be captured. It's a double-blind capture system. And after capturing, then it will be audited. There is a consortium of audit firms led by Grant Thornton, who are going to be auditing the results. Each auditor has a unique audit code, which they'll input into the system to confirm the correctness of the captured result. Once the captured result has been audited and there are no exceptions related to that result, you'll begin to see the votes reflecting on the leaderboard. When do we expect the first result? It is tough to call given the big turnout that we are dealing with. In elections past, we will get the first result around 1 a.m. On this occasion, it may take slightly longer because firstly, we count in 3 ballots instead of 2, and we count in more ballots in terms of voter turnout. So it's going to be slightly later than usual rather.
If a question has been asked, please do not repeat it so that we progress. I'm going to start from the middle and then we go to the back. From the middle, then we go to the back.
Can I start asking?
All right.
Thank you. Tsidi Madia from Eyewitness News. Just 2 questions really. Brasai, you made a remark about the 7-day window that you have to declare the elections. Are you attempting to conscientize us to something? That's the first question. Secondly, you speak about in your statement about some of the issues and how speedily you've dealt with them. An hour before you had this media briefing, you met with the political parties. They came out quite dissatisfied still about the responses the IEC has been putting to the challenges, saying that they are worried that the measures are simply not sufficient enough to deal with the crowds, because while you are saying every last person in the queue should be given a chance to vote, there's still a question some were raising about how long it takes to replenish ballots in some instances. It's already late in the night. People are worried about security. So I just wanted you to speak to that, where the parties that the parties that met with you are not happy still. Thank you.
Sorry.
Excuse me, can we please, may I request, I said let's start in the middle, because if you grab the microphone, it becomes a problem. We won't finish. May we start here and then go that way? Thank you very much. Yeah, proceed.
Salaino Makwidi from Salam Media. Just two quick questions. We saw a lot of videos on social media that might want to, put into question the legitimacy of the elections. Just how prepared was the IEC when it comes to, mitigating, fake videos that are going viral on social media? And then secondly, considering all of the delays, that have been, put forward by, all of the parties present, under which circumstances would the IEC consider extending the day of the elections?
Hi, William Vogo, Newsroom Africa. If the problems that come with the internet are acknowledged, as the Chief Electoral Officer just did, the delays, the mishaps, and all those things. Now, given our stage or level of internet penetration, the ability or inability of certain people to use the technology the way they are supposed to, and other associated problems, like we had stories of people who have had to leave Gauteng and go to your Limpopos and the Eastern Cape, only to be told when they get there that they cannot be serviced. Don't you think that you are going to disenfranchise a lot of people and thus opening up the outcome for legal challenges? And then my second question goes back to whether, which my colleague earlier asked, whether you feel still that you planned adequately for a high turnout.
Veronica Makhwadi again from Newsroom Africa. I just want to go back to the Thokoza fire station. We're getting reports now that voters have forced their way through the doors. Are you aware of that? Just please, any update in regards to the tensions there? Thank you.
Yes, hello, Celine Clary from AFP. You talk about a higher turnout than 2019. Do we have an estimate number of the turnout up to now?
Stembile Mbete with the SABC. We've seen at a lot of campuses in Johannesburg, in Gauteng, at Wits University. I've gotten some messages from the University of Pretoria and from TUT, where students have been in queues for about 8 hours today, and doesn't seem like the queues are moving. Have you gotten any official news about what's happening there and what measures are being put in place for students at the main universities in Gauteng in particular? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mawande. I work for the Sunday World. But I probably to go back to Section 24A issue, but I asked from a different perspective. We've been getting a lot of complaints about civil servants, for instance, like police officers, soldiers, who would have been deployed to different provinces that we have never foreseen that they wouldn't be at their places where they vote at the time of the elections, because these deployments happen as the last minute things. Can you talk to that as it relates to free and fair elections as well as the right to vote of those particular civil servants? And number two, the DCUO earlier on spoke about the result slip that a copy as well is left either at the wall or at the door of the voting station. My question to that is, how long does it stay there for the public? That's what he said, for the public. If they want to satisfy themselves, they can go and observe. For instance, if I want to go where I vote at Northcliffe Primary, and I'm here, let's say I'm living here at 1 o'clock, can I find it still there at the door or at the wall of my voting station? Lastly, as an interesting point, the pattern of the packing order of the ballot papers, what is the formula or methodology that was used? I asked this on the basis of the national, I particularly pick up national Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, where the MK party and the ANC are on the same line. And I ask it because of the politics that are on the ground as it relates to the competition between those two political parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I please pause? I'm going to take the last question, a question from you. When I come back, Pelad, you've got questions from the platform? Please proceed.
Thank you. Kokeli Bandla from SABC Radio. I would like to check, how would the IEC respond to registered voters that hold a view that their right to vote was compromised by Section 24A? And secondly, I have a direct message from a registered voter who tells me that they are very disappointed by the IEC because they applied online for a special vote. He received an SMS and was approved, but when he went to his VD, his name did not reflect from the voters roll. This is from Kariga Nelson Mandela Bay. The VD is in Tlemeza School at Anta Street, and the registered voter was not able to vote because his name did not reflect on the voters roll. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let me pause on that note. We have covered all the hands here. CO, when we come back, we take online questions, then we'll be closing. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Kate. In terms of the period for the declaration of results, Pete, just give me water. It's fine. So in terms of the period, the 7-day when I was growing up, if you have this type of thing, they say you probably are not telling the truth. So the 7-day period, look, the commission is careful not to take long to get to a point where they declare results. It is not the intention of the Commission to take the whole 7 days and have the country in suspense for that period. At a reasonable opportunity, the Commission will announce the outcome of the elections, balancing two imperatives. The one imperative is accuracy, because we've got to be accurate in the recording of the election result on the one hand. The second imperative is speed, because for as long as you don't announce the results, the country is in a politically tenuous situation. The markets react to that and so on. So it is not the intention of the Commission, therefore, to have a prolonged period without declaring the results. So that's what we really wish to indicate on that question. Look, the political parties have an opportunity to engage with the Commission through the Party Liaison Committee. And I think that is the structured mechanism of interface between the Commission and political parties. Really, they should not be lobbying the media to engage the Commission. There's a structured mechanism for parties to be engaging, and I think we should keep it that way. Social media preparedness. No, we've been quite prepared. We've put a lot of resources into managing the social media space, starting with the partnership that we had with the social media platforms themselves and our own internal capacity to monitor social media and then to respond. What is clear, though, is that the quantum of posts outpaced our reaction time. You know, you'll deal with something on Facebook and with something on X, and then it reappears somewhere on WhatsApp, and you only dealt with it on the other two, and so on. And one post, especially if it's of a negative nature, will be reposted several times and so on, despite explanations that are given. So we remain challenged by that phenomenon. What will it take to consider extending voting days? It's a very complicated consideration, because if you extend, what do you do with the ballots that are cast? And there are millions of them at this point. Where do you take them whilst you wait for the extended day? So you might be unwittingly be introducing dynamics that you are unable to handle. You might be introducing risk in an unintended fashion. Hence, the preference of the Commission is give everybody an opportunity to cast their ballots until voting is completed, whenever that is. No, it is not correct that the VMD disenfranchised people, precisely because where the VMD did not operate optimally, you could always use the physical copy of the voter's roll. It is not as if, for want of good efficiency of the VMD, persons could not vote. People could vote, and people voted using the physical copy of the voter's roll, which is a legislated requirement at the voting station. The estimate of high turnout, it's difficult to call until you complete the counting process. Suffice to say, it will probably be well beyond what we had, the 66% we had in 2019. Campuses, yes, we are aware of the difficulties that we experience at campuses. There's a huge turnout there. And, you know, it is not as if people are not being processed. They are being processed, but as much as you deal with a group, an equivalent number, if not more, join the queue. We don't lament that. It's a good problem to have. Hence our commitment to service them all. Even at many of the voting stations in Gauteng, KZN, and Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, as soon as you deal with numbers, a equivalent number, if not more, joins the queue, and they need to be serviced, and we want to service them. How long does the result slip stay? There's not a prescribed period. The idea really is to give people at that voting station a glimpse of what the outcome is at that voting station. Some stay there a week, others within a few hours they're taken off by the landlords and so on. But it's not there's no prescribed period. The sequencing of the screen follows the sequence on the ballot paper. So what you have on the left-hand side of that middle leaderboard is precisely the sequence of the ballot, and what you have on the right is precisely what you have on the ballot paper. I suppose it's a matter of curiosity, but it's not designed. It's purely on the basis of the sequence of the ballot paper. Section 24A is a legislated provision which has not been challenged. It was promulgated by Parliament to introduce a control in the voting process. So it's a lawful provision. It's part of our electoral prescripts, and as I indicated yesterday, it's not a gratuitous interference with the freedoms of people. It is important to protect the integrity of the election, because in 2019, people made claims that using this facility, they voted at one point and also went to go vote elsewhere. And that nearly imperiled the credibility of that election. Our country cannot afford a prospect of that sort. Now, the the issue that my sister raises about Togoza fire station, at the point when we came here, that matter had not come to our attention. It may have arisen since the media briefing started, but our colleagues over the cross there, they look at issues like that and resolve. I've dealt with all the questions. Thank you.
As we wrap up, I'm going to the extreme right. Piladi, can we start with you with online questions, and then we move like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions from our online colleagues. The first one is Nobuhle Similani from BBC. Voters at Waterfall Johannesburg voting stations have said they have been waiting for 7 hours to vote. Do we know what is behind the long waiting times in that area? And then question number 2 is Bongam Tembu from Luxion FM. We are still at the ground at our area of broadcast, Katlehong, Palm Reach and local areas, but we have seen police picking up while the masses are still coming in numbers. This is Ward 101 in Ekurhuleni, and also I haven't seen medical personnel around voting stations. Question number 3, Ndivuo Mulawuzi from Future Stars Media. We've just left the Soshanguve polling station in Juku Lane, namely Kondelelani Secondary School. There is a power outage. The whole voting station is in dark, forcing voters to use their phone flashlights to cast their ballots. With questionable security of those votes along voters, the queue is still long. Our observation noted only 1 police officer present. Despite Juku Lane's high crime rates, raising concerns about the inadequate security measures. Additionally, ANC members were seen at the gate in party regalia, singing party chants, which is against election protocol. Given these issues, how can the IEC ensure the security of the ballot boxes and the overall integrity of the elections? Then our last question is Disetso Manuko from Food from Zanzi.
Peladi, just take your mic a little bit up.
Okay.
Yes, please.
The last one is from Disetso Manuko from Food from Zanzi. My question relates to other stations getting 3 ballots and having to deposit in 3 boxes while others had an envelope. What is the criteria of different patterns of voting? Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I please, I need help. Can I please, Grenville, there's a lot of competition at the back. So can please, people at the cross, we need to finish this business. Can they please take it down? I'll appreciate. Where? Yeah, there's a bit of groupie there. Okay, let me take the last 3 questions that I've pointed out. Yes, starting with, no. Start with the gentleman here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sis Kate. Kaya Koko from Mail and Guardian. I just want clarity regarding the number of ballot boxes per VD. Is it supposed to be 3 or other VDs can have 1? I ask this because there's a voting station in Alex where all the ballot papers are being put in 1 box, not in 3 separate as in other VDs. So is that allowed? If so, why? And then the second and last question would be, with the snaking lines right now, what would the IEC put the, anecdotally speaking, high turnout so far in election? Is it down to the political parties or a mobilization by the commission itself? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nafisa Dango. I'm supporting Salam Media. We've been having an issue where we've been getting phone calls from Ward 58. We have been at the polling stations there. There's a serious issue. People have been waiting for over hours. There's not enough resources to be able to deal with the voters. And the concern that was coming from the councillor was that many voters are going away and we tend to be losing out on votes. So how are we going to solve this problem? Are we going to add additional resources in order to assist to be able to get that line going?
Okay, I'm taking the last two, then I'll be done. Thank you very much. We have to close. Our
Okay.
officials need assistance on the ground. Last two, please. That and that one, yeah.
Good evening. Francis Luagamachate, Progressive Independent News Agency. Mine is going to be short. There are allegations of a house that is owned by a political party member or leader in Mamelodi and Mafias that has been used as a voting station. Can you confirm if there's such and how true is that? Thank you so much.
Last one, thank you.
Thank you, Aviwem Dila from ENCA. Mine was that very question, just on the awareness of the IEC on that, and is that protocol that a government official's house can be used as a voting station? Also, just on one of the voting stations where it closed at 2 o'clock and community members were told that voting there is done, everyone has voted, and the IEC packed up. Is that...
Can you confirm the
procedure?
area, please?
It was raised by one of the political parties we were speaking to. I'll confirm in a moment.
Okay, we need details. Thank you very much, CO. Let's wrap up.
We can't be here in perpetuity. The situation in Waterfall was resolved a little while ago from the reports that we received. So it's now seemed to be operating much quicker than was the case before. You know, as we are here, I saw the Deputy National Police Commissioner who assured us that police can't withdraw from the voting station until the last voter has voted, and they then need to escort the presiding officer and or area manager back to the local storage sites. So if there are police withdrawing in, as you say, then it's an aberration. It is not the plan. The plan is that police stay at the station until everybody is served and until the counting process is concluded. The power outage in Juki Lane it's a matter that has not come to our attention. It may have just arisen, of course, but all we can indicate that the Commission has in its possession no less than 34,000 lights, because we anticipated that there may be situations such as those. And we should be in a position to provide those lights to all areas in Juku Lane. The envelopes vis-a-vis ballot boxes. Envelopes are used on special voting days outside the country, as well as special voting days inside the country. On election days such as today, there is no requirement to place cast ballots in envelopes. So you just need to use you need to deposit your cast ballots into the ballot boxes. The number of ballot boxes, we do have a voting station layout which depicts the flow of voters in a voting station, in terms of which 3 ballot boxes are recommended. and they're recommended to assist with the sorting of ballots. Because if you use 3, they are already sorted. Whereas when you use 1, they are all mixed up. So you must first take the national ones, take the regional ones, and take the provincial ones. So using 3 ballot boxes facilitates the sorting in that manner. If a presiding officer has not used 3 ballots, of course, it doesn't mean that those ballots are lawfully cast. It does mean that it will take longer to sort them out. Is turnout a result of the work of the commission or of political parties? I think it's a confluence of 2. The commission has done its job insofar as popularizing these elections and giving voter education, giving education on the 3 ballots, and so on. So the commission has played its role. But political parties have also worked very hard during the campaign period. They worked very hard to mobilize their supporters, to mobilize all South Africans, as it were, for participation, which is why we have this great turnout. The house of a political leader as a voting station. Look, let me give you the applicable framework. About 12 months before an election, there is a process where voting districts as well as voting stations in those voting districts are presented before the Municipal Political Liaison Committee. And each party makes suggestions as to the boundaries of the voting district as well as the choice of voting station in that voting district. So in that context, political parties should have raised an objection to this scenario. Because firstly, you need a centrally based station so that every body from all corners of the boundaries of that voting station has almost an equidistant, is almost equidistant in terms of their travel to the voting station. That's one. It has to be a facility that is free of political connotations, such as a house belonging to a leader of a political party. So one can look at that, but that is the framework that applies. Yes, sir.
Just on the voting stations that close at 2 o'clock, the one is Kwanonzondolelo Ward 2. Kwanonzondolelo Ward 2 in the Western Cape, where community members were told that the residents had voted and they were done. The other is in Saldanha Bay in George Gert Hall, where the voting station was closed and we were told that voting was, well, they were counting after 2 o'clock.
Today or yesterday?
Today, yeah.
It's strange, you know? We don't have that information, but we can go look at those details. It sounds, it's a very strange occurrence. Okay. Natasha Piri, what do you want to say?
I just wanted to add, but okay, you've partially covered me. I just wanted to make you aware.
But talk to the mic.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to make you aware of the issue that's happening, what's happening right now in Kwakwa, with some of the power cuts, the same complaints, and now people are said to be using their phones to actually go vote. Some have even turned away. There are also places like, can I just quickly read this?
In KZN, Ugu, Umzumbe, Ward 8, all the VDs, they also have the same problem of power outages and load shedding, and this despite the fact that the IEC had promised that there's going to be no load shedding today.
No, the IEC is not a provider of energy. That is ESCOM. What the IEC communicated to you was the assurances that we had received from ESCOM. Whether it is a case of load shedding or some other kind of outage, we're not sure. We'll go look, because obviously we don't want voting and counting to be happening in the dark. Those circumstances are less than ideal. We want everything under the lights, so that there are no allegations of things untoward happening during the cover of darkness. So thank you very much for your audience.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You've got our platforms available. We'll engage on those. Thank you. Ra leboga.
A very good evening to you on election night in South Africa. You're watching Eyewitness News, continuing coverage of elections 2024. The IEC gave a briefing here at the National Results Operations Centre a short time ago. No shortage of problems. The big word of the evening: delays. There are delays at multiple voting stations right across South Africa. One of those places, it's Wits University here in Johannesburg, where students have been lining up for hours, but they've still not been able to cast their ballots. People in Thokoza, we're hearing, have at some point, in fact, tried to force their way into a polling station because they simply could not get in. With political analyst, commentator Malaika Mahlatsi with me in studio as we make sense of what we've heard in the last few hours. Malaika, thank you for joining us. It became apparent from about lunchtime that things weren't going quite as well as they should. Has the IEC done a good enough job in preparing for what we're expecting to be an increase in turnout, essentially, which has now resulted in part in some of these problems?
So I do think that this is the issue is a combination of factors, one of which is that there was a lot of confusion about what Section 24A actually is. And I think if you listen to a lot of these complaints, a lot of concerns about people didn't know about the changes in the legislation. People didn't know the fact that they couldn't just walk into any voting station and cast their votes. So I think the issue more than anything else is not so much about whether or not the IEC was not prepared. I do think in terms of logistically, there were some challenges, of course, technical challenges, some of the challenges that we experienced. I mean, I know in the Eastern Cape, there is one area, I think it was in Mthatha, where very early in the morning, as early as 8 o'clock, it was very clear that there was going to be a bit of problems because the previous night there had been a lot of vandalism of lights, street lights, and communications infrastructure. So it was like pretty clear there that there would be problems even as early as 8 o'clock in the morning. And I think in other parts of the country as well, they were bound, and it's not even a new thing, right? That we do see some of these problems that with every election, there are some of these problems, these technical glitches, these logistical problems. But I do think the bigger issue here, Thembekile, was really about people simply did not understand what Section 24A was about.
Let's talk about Section 24A, because even in the briefing with the IEC, it came up a great deal. Let's talk about what it is and why it's impacted this election or the process as it's done today.
So previously, in the past, what we would do, if you were registered, right, you could go and vote anyway. So if you're registered, you could go and vote, and you could change your voting station manually on site, right? So the important thing is that it was on site. So if, let's say, for example, Thembekile was staying in Shawela and he decided that he wanted to vote in Robben Island, for example, right? You could go and on site manually change your details and you could vote in Robben Island, right? And so in 2024, this new legislation was passed, and part of what it seeks to do is to, first of all, minimize the logistical challenges that come with the IEC having to now, there would be situations where, for example, a voting station, a very small voting station, let's say like Robben Island, would have a lot of people flocking in. And while the IEC initially would make allowance for, a number of people, more people showing up than not, they were working on about a 10% markup. So if they were expecting 100 votes, they would still put 100 votes, they would still put about at least 10 extra votes, right? Just in case there are more people. But what then would end up happening is that at times you would find that the number of people showing up would be far higher than what was anticipated. Right. Far exceeding even the markup that was put there and availed. And so what that created was a logistical crisis, because you then had to have more ballots being brought into places and so on. But even the process of just moving ballots from one place to another and so on did create a little bit of problem, and it does also call into question issues of legitimacy, because once you now have ballot boxes passing too many hands, you are creating a bit of a problem. And so what this legislation sought to do was precisely to address that issue, to say that when you go to a polling station, when you go to a voting station rather, voting stations must know exactly how many people are going to show up there, right? And so what Section 24, and this is why the Section 24, so the process was still the same in a sense that people could still change their addresses and so on, but a time period was given based on the electoral timetable, right? And so with the changing of the addresses and all of that, that would have stopped on the 17th of May at about 1 minute to midnight. So there was a period of time where people could still change, people could go online, and there were other avenues. You could go to the IEC offices and so on. You could do that. So even remotely, I mean, for example, I can tell you, Tembegile, I was in Germany at some point and I thought I'd be voting there. I changed my address to that. When I knew I was coming back, I changed it back to South Africa. You could do that online. So you basically apply, you notify, you don't even apply, you notify the IEC about these changes that you are doing, right? And what that does is that it allows IEC an opportunity to have logistical preparations in place. So they know that if Tembegile is going to be voting in Shawela at this particular voting station, this is the number of ballot papers that we will need, and they'll then still put up that 10% markup. So the point of this legislation was to, first of all, stop the logistical crisis that often used to happen in previous elections, but secondly, bring even stronger credibility and legitimacy to elections, because you've got a voter's roll and it's clear who's voting here, and you simply are using that, and there's no manual.
But has it not had the opposite effect, Malaika? Because today we're hearing people in the briefing with the IEC, some journalists saying they're hearing of farm workers, for example, in the Cape, who've not been able to vote because they could not get to polling station A, and there was already this Section 24A process underway, and people seem to not have understood the implications.
So and for me, Tembegile, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about that, about why that could have been, because I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the IEC. In fact, the IEC has been having this information out since as far back as 2021. This information has been on the IEC website. The IEC has been communicating about this since as far back as 2021. So I do think that perhaps we might need to give a bit of a reflection about why is it that this information, because it got to some people. I mean, take for example, even with the special votes, you had over 2 million people who did apply for special votes. So clearly, there is still a huge number of people that knew about some of these changes that are happening to the legislation and to the voting process. And there were still just others who did not know.
What about, Malaka, the issue of these voter management devices? Because that's also come up a great deal. These would be, by the way, if you're wondering, the tablet-like gadget that is at the polling station when you arrive to vote. We've heard today that some of them have simply been giving an error message. Some have not been able to connect to the internet, and that has caused delays. Should we abandon that? Because Simon Mabula was saying, first of all, it's not even a legal requirement for them to use them. That's why where they are failing, the IEC is now having to go the manual route. Should we just go manual?
Look, I'm of the view that some of these challenges should have been anticipated, you know, and I'm thinking about this also in the context of, take for example, something like the Gauteng provincial government, when it introduced that online system of applications for grade 1 and grade 8 learners to apply on the online system and so on, to manage the issue of getting students into schools and so on. There was a time. So over the years, I mean, there's still challenges even now, but over the years they have gotten better. So a lot of things have gotten better. There's still a lot of challenges, but things have gotten better because there's been better management, there's been better understanding of what the problems are, and better strategies of mitigating against those problems. And I see this as one of those things. I think that the technology route has the potential to legitimize, to bring even greater legitimacy to the election process. The unfortunate thing is that it's a trial and error method. And we are seeing today, for example, Section 20A in theory is a very good way of bringing about stability to the election, legitimizing elections, making things logistically easier. But in this particular election, it really did not do so well. But it's a new legislation, it's an amendment, in fact. It's that A actually stands for amendment in 24A. It's an amendment, it's new, and there's a bit of confusion with it. And clearly, there's probably even an issue about poor communication in regard to it. There's clearly something about communicating this did not go right. And I want to believe that in the next election, that will be our local government election after this, I'm hoping things will be better, but I don't think we should abandon that system. The world is moving towards a world of technology. Technology also has got some important safeguards that it can provide for us, right? I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think that there are important lessons that we have learned in this particular election about some of the limitations that we have with these election devices.
And I'm hoping we'll be able to show you some of the pictures of the delays. Voting stations, as I was saying, the Durban City Hall is one area where there are long queues still tonight of people who are waiting to vote. If you look at the situation in the Joburg CBD, there's a long queue as well of students around Wits University. These are some of the pictures that we've been receiving from people who are in various parts of South Africa waiting to vote. A great deal of people, in fact, it must be said, are persisting. They will be staying out there. They want to cast their vote tonight. Simon Mabolo, the head of the IEC, in fact, saying a short time ago in the briefing that they're expecting turnout this year to be higher than in 2019. People want to vote, and they will be allowed to vote according to the IEC if you're already at a voting station. Those stations are supposed to close at 9 o'clock, but if you are already there at cutoff time, you will still be allowed to cast your ballot. So on this issue of the frustration today then, Malaika, how much of what's happened in the last few hours has the potential to harm the credibility not only of the IEC, but the credibility of the process itself?
So I do think, I mean, certainly there are going to be questions about the legitimacy. Absolutely, there will be questions. And it's especially because what we are seeing now with this, particularly this confusion about Section 24A, is that it's not specific to one area. It's a universal issue across the country. Literally every province is reporting, polling stations or voting stations where there are problems. So
I mean, in Kwakwa, for instance, we're hearing there's a power outage. People are using their cell phone torches to light up the center. Others are leaving.
Yeah. So it's not a small issue. It's a universal problem that we are seeing across the country. We've got problems across the country. So if it was just one thing, we would say it's an isolated incident. This is clearly not isolated. It's happening across the country, and it does call into question. There are concerns, but I don't think that the election itself is illegitimate on the basis of that, right? And the IEC has really done a lot to try and, for example, the argument about, we've had to even revert to going manual in some of these voting stations. The IEC is doing its best, really, to try and arrest some of the problems that we are seeing. Some of them it's not going to be able to do so. You've got people, for example, who didn't know that they were, Section 24A voters who didn't know that they couldn't even vote on all three ballots unless they had even, manually inputted their addresses and changed that and so on. So sometimes you've got people who only have got the national ballot and they simply will not be able to vote in the other ballots because that's what the IEC has captured. So some of those issues, of course, are not going to be resolved now. But I do think that as far as possible, the IEC really has tried, and even the provision to say, because we've got this huge voter turnout, anybody who is already at the voting station by 9 p.m. will vote, even if it's going to be at 12 p.m. whatever. We will make sure everybody does get to vote. I think things like that do at least indicate the extent to which the IEC wants to deliver a credible election, wants to deliver a legitimate election. But there are these problems, and these problems are very real problems. But I don't think they are real. They are so. I don't think that they necessarily threaten the entire legitimacy of the whole process. I think they do talk about some problems, but the process has been, as far as possible, fair and workable. But of course, there's certainly problems. There are problems.
How much of this should we blame on the politicians? Because much of the legislation around the changes to the way in which we are voting this year took a long time to pass through Parliament.
And in fact, even Tembekile, not only did things take a long time to pass through Parliament, but I'm thinking about, I was reflecting on the messaging of political parties going towards elections, right? So there was a lot of talk about mobilizing, even towards the voter registration weekends in November and in February, getting people to register, getting people to vote, and so on. Not a lot was done to explain to people what the new legislative changes have been.
We told them to go out, but we didn't really explain what the change would be.
And register to vote. But there really was not. I don't think there was as much an investment in getting people to understand the legislative changes by political parties as there should have been. And I think part of it is also speaks to their own their own contribution to the problem that we are seeing. The IEC did as far as it could, right? And voter registration and voter conscientization and voter education. Really, political parties must be at the center of this in particular. And I don't think they were, at least insofar as explaining what these legislative changes were.
And the budgetary cuts then, because the IEC is not as well funded as it was in the previous elections, like with many other entities in this country that run on money that comes from the taxpayer. That budget has shrunk.
Yes.
How much does that compromise the ability of the IEC to run a credible process?
And you must understand something, Tembekile, that we are not just having budget cuts, right, taking place. They are also happening at a time when we've got a higher turnout, voter turnout. And so you've got less money for an even higher number of voters in this. And I think that already tells you you are already bound to have a problem, because you already did not have adequate resources to cater to the few people or to the number of people that were initially on the voters' roll. And now you've added over 1 million more people here that you must cater to, and we are seeing these things. So certainly the underfunding of the IEC it absolutely will have, even moving forward, devastating consequences for our democratic project and devastating consequences for the very legitimacy of the election in itself.
So the EFF has issued a statement already saying that it's concerned that what has happened today, it hopes, in fact, that what we have seen as per these delays is not some sort of deliberate ploy involving the IEC to force an extension of voting, say perhaps into another day tomorrow, or something more nefarious. Is that a fair concern?
I don't think it's a fair concern. In fact, I think it's actually one of the most worrying concerns that I keep hearing. And it's also some of the things that you see on social media as well, with the proliferation of fake news and so on. A lot of the attacks and a lot of the unfair and negative criticism has been particularly towards the IEC, and specifically to accuse the IEC of colluding with the African National Congress specifically. And typically, we don't have any reference of that, right? The IEC has never done anything of that nature before. I'm not sure why anybody would think that something like that could happen with the kinds of guardrails that the IEC has put in place and the kind of guardrails that we have. I mean, insofar as even having, international observers, SADC Election Observer Mission, the AU Observer Mission, and so on, and many other guardrails that are really just in process to ensure the delivery of a free and fair democratic process and election. I don't believe that these allegations are fair, and I think they're also very harmful to the IEC, but also harmful to the election itself, right? Because when you create such a narrative that has no basis in fact, because like I'm saying, there is no historical record or reference that we can go to and say the IEC colluded with the ANC here, or the IEC colluded with any other political party for that matter in this particular election. When you perpetuate a narrative like that, you bring a crisis of credibility to the election process in itself in a country where fake news and the proliferation of disinformation is particularly so insidious.
And in all fairness to the EFF, when he was queuing to vote in his hometown in Seshego today, the EFF leader Julius Malema said there wasn't anything credible that they could see that suggested that the IEC had deliberately acted to compromise this election. And he said they should be given time in that early point where there were these delays, but it was after I think he'd waited about 3 hours or so to cast his ballot that they then said, hold on a minute, something is not right here. What needs to happen now for the IEC to regain ground, especially in the eyes of the public and the political parties? Because once there is doubt, it can spread quite quickly.
I think one of the things that the IEC needs to do is really be very transparent and explain and be honest about it. I mean, I was listening to the IEC now, speaking about, when journalists with this media conference that it just had, when some questions were asked and so on, I did feel like some of the questions were not answered adequately. And perhaps even to a degree were not answered with the fullness that they needed to be answered with. And I think the IEC, one of the only ways it can really reclaim its legitimacy is to be transparent, be honest also about some of the challenges that are as a result of its own shortcomings, right? The IEC has to bring us into confidence and be honest about the extent of the problem, the extent to which it has contributed to the problem.
Because, for instance, they couldn't tell us in the briefing tonight about these voter management devices, how many of them have caused a problem. Earlier in the lunchtime briefing, there was a question about training. We found out that people who are in some level of managerial post in the IEC went through training, and then you had to get about an 80% assessment in terms of a pass and then cleared. But when you hear some of what people are saying anecdotally about their experience, where it appeared people at voting station level did not fully understand how things were supposed to play out today, it's concerning.
Yeah, no, I think the IEC has to be honest with us, right? And I think the IEC has to come out, and even if it's not, some of the things it needs to say might not make it look good. It's really the only way in which you can, because I mean, it's very bad for the IEC more than anyone else for this kind of anxiety and this kind of distrust to be happening. Because when this happens, it's not just about this election. It's not about the illegitimacy of this election that people are questioning. It's about the entire election process. And people then begin to wonder the next election and the next election after that. So a precedent must not be set. And the only way that can happen is for the IEC, number one, to resolve some of the problems that are already happening now. So we saw the high number of people, large number of people who are still at the voting stations waiting to vote. Those people must be allowed to vote. Everyone who is already at a voting station right now should be allowed to vote. That is not even a question. There should be no compromise on that, right? And the IEC must ensure that it puts every resource available to ensuring that everyone who is already at the voting station is able to vote and to cast their vote. At least that on its own says something about the extent to which the IEC itself is willing to see this process unfold. But I mean, I think also the IEC at some point also does then need to have a meeting with the country and talk to us about what these challenges were, the extent to which these challenges, and just be frank with us about some of these things and tell us what are some of the ways in which also it's going to make this thing different in the next election. Because if we don't trust this election process, then it has a bearing on the coming elections as well.
I want to pick up on that in a moment, but I don't know if you've got that shot of the floor here, because some of the political parties' leaders, at least, have already started to make their way to the National Results Centre. A short time ago, I saw Build One South Africa leader Musi Maimane is here. The ANC has already deployed Nomvula Mokonyane, the first Deputy Secretary General, to also be here. So they're already walking around. But the IEC has confirmed that there's going to be a delay in the declaration of results, because obviously, if most stations are still open beyond 9 o'clock, counting will be delayed. So usually they say those numbers would come in at around 1 a.m. This year it'll be much later. But there is good news, I think, in all of this, Malaika, in the sense that we're hearing that turnout is expected to be higher than 2019.
Yes.
Why do South Africans want to vote this year more than in previous years?
So I think it's a combination of several factors, one of which is that the IEC and even political parties, as we were speaking about, we mentioned earlier, Temegile, did do quite a very good job in mobilizing voters to register, right? That registration process, I mean, the IEC in February registered just the voter registration weekends that it had between November and February, was able to register over 1 million new voters, 77% of whom were young people below the age of 29. And that's telling of the extent to which the IEC and political parties have gone to mobilize, in particular, young people to register to vote. But I also think it's about the political moment that we find ourselves in. You know, the 30 years of democracy, I think, has a lot of meaning for so many of us. It's a lot of meaning for South Africa as a country. It's a point of reflection, right? 30 years is not a very short time, but it's not a long time, but it's not a very short time either. For us to be able to go back and reflect on what 3 decades of democracy have meant for so many people. And it has been quite a very disappointing experience for many. Many other positive gains as well, but people are now able to say, you know, we have had a full experience of what, I mean, democracy is no longer that young, and they've had a full experience of this democracy, and people have got a clearer idea of also what is possible more than anything else, right? So for a very long time in South Africa, the party political system was such that, you know, we had a one party, not necessarily a dominant party political system, and we've seen over the last 6, 7 years or so, in particular since 2016, we are seeing now that the party political system in South Africa has been significantly challenged. It's evolving in the most dramatic of ways, and I think it's almost coming to its maturity. We've had now 2 local government elections in which we've had coalition governments emerging out of that, right? And so I think people now have an experience of what it is like to be governed differently, what it is like to imagine and think about South Africa differently outside this context of a dominant party political system.
Can we compare this to 1994, as some have tried to do, or is this the most important moment electorally in our democracy since 1994?
I think every
Are
election,
we being dramatic?
Look, there's something important in it, right? I think there's something quite important in it, and part of what is important in it is also about the demographic. I think that the demographic question is a very important question in that comparison, right? Now more than ever, we've got so many young people who are voting. The youth vote will literally decide this election, right? Young people, 42% of people who are voting in this election are young people. 42%. We didn't have that even in 1994, right? So I think at that level, there's something very profoundly symbolic and important about this election. It speaks to the demographic changes in South Africa, but in the African continent as well. It's also an election that's happening at a very interesting time, in terms of the geopolitics of the world, right? It's happening in the context of the war on Palestine, in the context of a war in which so many people are invested beyond the confines of the Middle East, right? South Africa has been a very big voice and a big player in that. But young people in particular have taken the lead in terms of the articulation and the fight on behalf of Palestinian people across the world. In the United States, we are seeing at universities young people at the forefront, even here at Wits University and so on. So young people now more than ever are beginning to come into themselves and to assert themselves. And I think this election is particularly symbolic because of that demographic, because of the world in which it takes place.
Also more unpredictable as far as calling it, right? Because
absolutely.
these are, a lot of them them are actually
Absolutely.
first-time voters,
Yeah.
and we don't know which way they'll swing.
But also, one of the things that I also find interesting, I was actually thinking yesterday, I read a very interesting study yesterday about, I think it was Africa Check that wrote this very interesting report about how actually part of why this election is particularly very difficult to call is because it has got actually a very high number of undecided voters. And so all the analysis that we tend to be doing and the polls that we tend to be taking and so on, that tends to be to look very, very clearly at the political parties that are being voted for. But going into this election, as far as 3 weeks ago, 35% of people who had registered to vote were undecided voters. That's a huge number of people who are undecided, right? And so when you make an analysis about those who have said what they will be voting for, you must still remember that there's 35% of the voters who had not yet decided by the time of going to the polls.
Are they undecided because the options are poor, or are they undecided because the parties have put in a great campaign, great policy proposals?
I think so. Part of the indecision also is about the fact that a lot of young people who are coming in to vote are young people, right? I mean, I can tell you, my younger brother is a first-time voter. I went with him to vote today, and like many other young people, he's conflicted, right? He's been bombarded with a lot of this information by all these different political parties, and so he's having to make sense of that in this election, and it's him and many of his generation, first-time voters, who are having to make sense of that, right? But I also think that there's also, quite frankly, a level of dejection about the political process in South Africa that we are seeing, right? A lot of people, I mean, you hear a lot of people saying, we've been voting and we are tired
Nothing's
of voting.
changed.
I mean, there's a community called Kiskamashoek. Kiskamashoek, yes. And they decided, they made a decision as an entire community, they will not vote. The entire community did not vote. The polling stations were opened there, and the voting stations, and they did not vote. And their reason that they did not vote was that they are concerned about the 1996, as far back as 1996, land claim that has not been addressed. So they're raising a 1996. They said we've been voting and voting and voting, raising this issue about our land claim, and it has not been addressed over time. And we have now taken a decision that we are not going to participate in this voting and so on. And so I do think that we are seeing also, more than anything, people saying, we've got some of these other issues that are outstanding, and we are tired of using this instrument of voting when we are not seeing changes that are happening. And so I think part of the indecision is about that for some people, that people are like, things are not really fundamentally changing and so on. But for some people as well, it's really about the fact that they just simply, a lot of these political parties, I mean, you read the DA key priority areas. They've got the 7 key priority areas. ANC has also got their 7 key priority areas and so on. And you've got all of them. The DA, for example, one of their priority areas is universal health care, right? So they say we want basic health care for everyone, right? But the EFF says the same thing. We want universal healthcare for everyone. The modalities are different. The ideological grounding of that is very different.
Same on land expropriation without compensation.
So,
free education, what does that mean?
Modalities,
really?
the philosophical and ideological outlook to that. And I think a lot of this is just a lot of information overload for particularly the new voter, right? Okay. You do still find a lot of people that are very set on who they're going to be voting for. But I think also the coalition experience that we've had in our country has made quite a number of people feel that perhaps we shouldn't go the route of having a dominant party political system. Let's see if this coalition thing can work, but which coalition, which partners would we want to see in that coalition? And I think that's some of the things that a lot of questions that South Africans are grappling with that we are seeing in this election.
Malaka, thank you so much. You've been watching an Eyewitness News broadcast, special coverage that's going to continue from here. The National Results Operations Center with myself, Tembekile Mkhototo, Kwazi Gwaza, as well as Jane Dutton and the team. We will keep you updated on the briefings as well as live reports from various parts of the country. Plenty of reaction expected to come in, especially in the next 24 hours as we begin to see the votes being tallied and declared. And of course, the political parties will no doubt be responding to the delays today and how they think that may have affected their fortunes in elections 2024. Until next time, thank you so much for watching the special Eyewitness News broadcast. Remember, there's more for you on the Prime Media Plus app. We're also live on YouTube throughout the rest of the week. From myself, Tembekile Mkhototo. See you soon. Bye-bye.